In the modern world of RC racing, there are two main types that are the most popular, at least here in the US, and that's 8-scale racing and 10-scale racing. They both have their own history and intricacies that make them unique and challenging in their own way. In this video, we'll be highlighting and going into more detail about the differences between the two and which one you should go into depending on what you're already into. I have done a video like this, or at least sort of like this, with 8-scale before, with my 500 sub special, which was a while ago now, but I intend to go more into detail this time around. Also, the audio on that video kinda sucks, so yeah. It's also important to note that I'll be looking into this from a racer's perspective, so if I don't mention any basher or crawler differences, I apologize for that. Anyway, before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and be sure to like the video as well. Alright, let's get started. Let's take a look at the differences between the kits themselves and how they differ from one another. First, let's take a look at 8th scale. Even though 8th scales from different companies have their differences, they all pretty much follow the same sort of formula. They all have all-wheel drive systems, they all have thick aluminum chassis with plastic or carbon fiber side guards, and they all use 4 cells of LiPo batteries. However, the layout of these cars can change from brand to brand, from a little bit to a lot. Take for example the differences between a Hot Bodies E819RS and my associated B4E. A Hot Bodies uses a pretty tried and true chassis setup with a standard 4S battery on one side and the electronics on the other. It also uses C-hubs in the front and has chassis braces to help tune chassis stiffness. My associated from the initial glance looks pretty much identical, but once you take the body off it starts to look a bit different. The two major differences between the two is that for one, the associated uses a saddle pack system, meaning two 2S packs instead of one 4S pack, and two, the associated uses pillow balls instead of C-hubs. Now I won't get into detail about how this affects the car's performance, but once you start messing with setup, you can pretty much make any car handle how you want. But my general point is that 8-scale buggies and by extension truggies may seem very similar from the outset. They do have small to incremental changes between them that make them different from one another and gives them their identity from brand to brand. 10-scale kits on the other hand can vary a lot in terms by design, by brand, by class, by drivetrain, and by what surface the car is designed to drive on. Something you'll only really see in the 10-scale world is kits, specifically two-wheel drive buggies, being sold as either carpet/turf cars or dirt cars. This is for a few reasons. For one, the setup changes from dirt cars to carpet cars is vast enough to warrant it. You may see 8-scale cars changing their setups from high to low grip conditions, but you won't see one replacing the center diff with a slipper clutch or direct drive, nor will you see one change their entire transmission design based on the surface you intend to race on. This kind of stuff is pretty average in the world of 10-scale off-road racing. A good example would be the difference between the B6.4D and the B64. The B64 Carpet Edition comes with sway bars, a gear diff, a longer chassis, and some other things I'm probably forgetting to mention as well. Whereas the B64 Dirt Edition comes with a ball diff, shorter chassis, and no sway bars included. Kind of the reason why the B64D is a little bit cheaper compared to the Carpet Edition. This doesn't just extend to the two-wheel drive buggy world either. Four-wheel drive buggies have the same sort of differences between the dirt and carpet kits. SCTs and stadium trucks on the other hand usually don't come with a dirt or carpet version for the most part, as they simply aren't as popular as the other two these days. However, the same sort of idea applies to tuning them for carpet and AstroTurf. Another thing that splits 10 scales and 8 scale kits is their overall durability and what they were designed to take punishment-wise. Like I mentioned in my RC8B4E video, 8-scale buggies are designed to take a beating far beyond reason because they are regularly put under stress far beyond reason. 10 scales on the other hand are not designed to take the same level of punishment as 8-scale cars are. 10-scale tracks usually aren't filled with part-breaking jumps and features that put them under a lot of stress, especially carpet and AstroTurf tracks. As a result, if you drive hard enough or poor enough, things will start to go wrong. Oddly though, 8-scale cars tend to require a lot more attention than 10-scale cars in terms of maintenance. Because they are subject to a lot more punishment than 10-scale, even if things don't break, they can get worn down. I've never had to fully replace a chassis on a 10-scale car, nor is this ever really needed. 8-scale cars on the other hand usually wear down their aluminum chassis after a certain amount of time, usually after a few years of racing seasons depending on how often you race. By contrast, I've had this SE 6.2 for a while now, and it hasn't even lost its anodizing yet. Keep in mind, I've never used a chassis protector on this thing. Not only that, but I have yet to feel any of the bottom screws on my 10 scale rigs begin to back out, whereas this has happened on my B4E after only 2 race events. This isn't a knock on the 8 scales or the B4E, by the way. I'm simply stating that 8 scales require a lot more attention from you than 10 scales, most of the time, especially if we're counting nitro vehicles. Next up we have the driving style. The driving style applied to most of 10th scale is very much a circuit style type of driving compared to say the majority of 8th scale or even 5th scale. Depending on the grip level, drifting simply isn't a fast way to get around a corner. Again, this is amplified on carpet and AstroTurf. Not only that, but the handling characteristics between the different 10th scale classes is very much a factor depending on what kind of driving style you have. The same driving techniques that work for say mini trucky may not work for say two-wheel drive buggy, and vice versa. A good example would be controlled oversteer. Four-wheel drive vehicles have a much easier time compared to two-wheel drive vehicles, especially on loose surfaces. If you want to drift on a loose surface of the two-wheel drive buggy, you can pretty much forget about it. Then there's that same point of certain cars in 10th scale only being driven by 2 wheels. Two-wheel drive means two-wheel braking, and as a result you simply have as much control in the air as say a big 8th scale rig or really anything 4-wheel drive. On the other hand, 8th scale racing is much more involved than 10th scale in terms of both visualization and execution. One thing in 8th scale that is extremely important to your success is understanding and visualizing weight transfer. Now, this is still important in 10th scale, but arguably it's more important in 8th scale, or at the very least easier to visualize. Because 8th scale buggies accelerate and decelerate quicker, and because they're much heavier, they tend to dip, dive, and lean a little bit more than their 10th scale counterparts. Because of this, it's much easier to know which part of the car has the most and least amount of grip. Let me try to explain it better by visualizing it. Imagine this water bottle is your car, and the water inside is its weight. When you accelerate, all of the weight moves towards the rear of the car. This ultimately gives your rear tires more traction and your front tires less traction. Of course, when you come to a stop, this effect is reversed. Since the weight is now over the front wheels, they have more grip and the rear has less grip. Now, what would happen if we were to increase the weight or water in this case? Well, since the amount of water/weight is being transferred has increased, so has the force behind it. This is what I mean when I say weight transfer is a little bit more important in 8th scale than 10th scale. Because they weigh more, the effect of weight transfer is amplified. Another thing affected by this increase in mass is aerial control. Because the wheels and tires on an 8th scale are much larger, the motors are more powerful, and because all 4 wheels are being driven, any input you make in the car or in the air will dramatically affect how your car behaves. I won't get too much into how to actually control your car in the air as it's still something I'm discovering on my own, but what I will say is that learning aerial control is extremely important in 8th scale as the need for it arises more often in 8th scale than in 10th scale, as jumps tend to be larger and tracks tend to get bumpier. The biggest difference between the two scales, at least for me, would have to be cost. Now, I've already done videos on both 10th and 8th scale, so we do have a definitive price difference between the two. For 10th scale, it was right around $1,560, and for 8th scale, it was right above $2,000. What I forgot to go over in those videos, however, was the follow-up cost of each, and it's here where 10th scale really starts to look a lot more budget-friendly. The biggest cost over time, depending on your track surface and whether or not you run nitro, is going to be tires. 8th scale tires are a lot more expensive than 10th scale tires, especially trucky tires. And that leads me to my next point. If you ever wanted to expand your fleet of cars so you can race in more classes, it's far cheaper to do so in 10th scale as all of the components to make a kit actually raceable are all much cheaper than they are in 8th scale. Overall, if you're looking for a budget way to get into RC racing, and you have both options available to you, go with 10th scale. Those are some of the differences between the two classes. If you want more info on some of the intricacies between 10th scale and 8th scale racing, feel free to check out some of my other videos on the topic on my channel. Also, if you liked the video, be sure to hit the like button and comment what you think of the video as well. Any amount of engagement helps. Also, if you want to help me another way, be sure to check out my Patreon where I post updates on what my videos are going to be and what they're going to be about. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Ryan Lamb, Joe Jenkins, Juliet Lovelace, The Mailman 110, Brian Lofton, and especially Morrison Watt. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.